The ceiling fan in Pine Ridge Diner turned slow and tired, like it had been spinning since the Eisenhower administration and never once been thanked. Late afternoon light fell through the windows in long amber slabs, catching dust motes that drifted with no place to be. The smell of fresh coffee and day-old pie settled into the booths like old tenants who had long stopped paying rent, but nobody had the heart to evict. Rosie Beckett sat alone at a corner table, her sneakers dangling 3 inches above the tile floor. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with tangled brown hair pulled into a lopsided ponytail that had started the day neat and surrendered somewhere around second recess. Her sketchbook lay open before her, and she drew with the kind of focus that made the rest of the world disappear. Today it was a horse. Yesterday it was the mountain she could see from her bedroom window. The day before that, a picture of her mother sleeping on the couch with one shoe still on, which Rosie thought was the funniest thing she had ever witnessed in her entire life. She glanced at the door again. The bell above it stayed silent. It had not rung in 20 minutes, and Rosie had counted, because counting was something she did when waiting got heavy. She counted the tiles on the floor once. 112, not including the cracked one by the jukebox that Mr. Harlan said he would fix last summer and had not. She counted the songs the radio played. She counted the times Mr. Harlan wiped the same spot on the counter, which was currently at 14 and climbing. Waiting was the shape of Rosie Beckett's life, and she had learned to fill it with observation. The way the light changed color as the sun moved. The way different customers walked, some heavy with the day, some light and careless. The way Mr. Harlan hummed when he thought no one was listening. Always the same song, something old and so that Rosie did not know the name of, but could hum along to by now. Her mother, Nora Beckett, worked 2 jobs. The first was a nursing shift at Flagstaff Medical Center that started before dawn and ended sometime after the sun gave up trying. The second was evening inventory at Whitfield's General Store on Route 66, a job that paid just enough to cover the gap between what the hospital offered and what life demanded. Nora was always late. Not because she was careless, but because the world kept asking more of her than any single person should have to give, and Nora Beckett had never once in her 33 years learned how to say no. Rosie understood this the way children understand weather. You cannot change it. You can only dress for it. So she waited, she drew, she sipped her hot milk, which Mr. Harlan, the owner of Pine Ridge Diner, brought her without being asked and without charging, because he had been watching this little girl wait for her mother 3 evenings a week for the past 2 years, and he was not made of stone. Mr. Harlan was 70, bald as a river rock, with reading glasses that lived permanently on the tip of his nose. He wiped the counter with a rag that was older than most of his customers. The diner had been his for 41 years. He had seen everything. Births announced over breakfast. Divorces negotiated over dinner. A man once proposed with a ring hidden inside a biscuit, and the woman almost choked to death. And Mr. Harlan had to perform the Heimlich, and they still got married, and they still came in every Sunday, and Mr. Harlan still made sure their biscuits were ring-free. He had seen everything. Or so he believed. The sound came from the east, low and distant, like thunder that had forgotten to bring rain. It rolled across the desert floor and entered town as a vibration before it became a noise. The water glass on Rosie's table trembled. The surface of her hot milk rippled in small concentric circles, and she stared at it with the delight of a child who has just discovered physics without knowing its name. Mr. Harlan stopped wiping. His hand froze mid-stroke. He squinted through the window, and the color left his face like someone had pulled a plug at the bottom of his neck. He muttered a single word under his breath. A name, really. 2 words that in Flagstaff, Arizona carried more weight than a loaded freight train. Hell's Angels. The sound grew. The glass shook harder. Rosie looked up from her milk, curious, tilting her head like a sparrow watching a hawk it did not yet know to fear. Outside, the desert wind had been pushing red dust around the parking lot all afternoon, but now even the wind seemed to step aside. 6 gleaming black Harley-Davidsons rolled in off the highway in a formation so tight and deliberate it looked choreographed. The last of the sunset caught their chrome and threw it back in blinding shards. Engines cut. The silence they left behind was heavier than the roar. The door of Pine Ridge Diner opened. Cold air rushed in first, followed by 6 men who made the cold air feel like a gentle suggestion. They were enormous, not just tall, but wide-built from decades of road and iron and meals eaten standing up. Leather jackets black as motor oil covered in patches that told stories no one in the diner wanted to hear. Gloves, thick beards, tattoos crawling up forearms and necks like ivy on condemned buildings. The smell of them arrived a half-second later, leather and engine grease and desert dust, and the faint metallic tang of something Rosie could not name, but every adult in the room recognized as danger. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 3 degrees, though no one had opened a window. The radio, which had been playing something soft and forgettable, seemed to lower its own volume as though even the electronics understood that the room now belonged to someone else. A woman mid-bite set her fork down without finishing the motion. An elderly man at the counter lowered his newspaper so slowly it made no sound. A couple near the window pressed deeper into their booth as though trying to merge with the upholstery. Mr. Harlan gripped his counter rag like a rosary. 6 men, 6 pairs of boots hitting tile in unison. The sound of them walking was a drumline. They took the large table near the center of the diner, just steps from where Rosie sat with her sketchbook and her milk and her lopsided ponytail. Chairs scraped, leather creaked. The table groaned under the weight of forearms laid upon it, and then the last one entered. He was the tallest, the broadest, the quietest. He stood in the doorway for a full 3 seconds, scanning the room with eyes that were the color of steel left out in winter rain. Salt and pepper beard, thick and trimmed close. A scar across his left eyebrow that split the hair into 2 halves that never grew back together. His leather jacket bore more patches than the others, and the way they moved around him told a story clearer than any words could. This was the one they followed. This was the one they feared. This was the one who decided. His name was Garrett Slade. He was 60 years old. He had been riding since he was 16 and leading since he was 30, and in the intervening decades he had buried friends and enemies in equal measure and lost count of both. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. He nodded once to his crew and walked to the table. His chair creaked like a warning when he sat. He raised 2 fingers without looking at anyone in particular. 6 waters, coffee, black. His voice was low and rough, the kind of voice that sounded like it had been dragged across gravel and never fully healed. Mr. Harlan nodded so fast his glasses nearly flew off his nose. He turned to the counter and his hands shook badly enough that the metal spoon rang against the coffee cup like a tiny, terrified bell. Every person in that diner was now engaged in the ancient human art of pretending to be invisible. Eyes down, voices gone, forks still. The only sounds were the ceiling fan, the coffee machine, and the slow breathing of people who wished very much that they were somewhere else. Every person except one. Rosie Beckett looked up from her sketchbook and stared directly at Garrett Slade's left arm. She did not see the danger. She did not register the fear humming through the room like a low electrical current. She was 9 years old, and the world to her was still a series of interesting things to look at. And right now, the most interesting thing in Pine Ridge Diner was the tattoo on the big man's forearm. It was magnificent. A skull wearing a helmet set between 2 sharp wings spread wide, every line deep and dark, as if carved by a blade rather than a needle. The detail was extraordinary. Feathers in the wings individually rendered. The helmet's visor cracked in a way that seemed intentional, artistic, like the skull beneath had fought its way through the glass. Under the diner's yellow lights, the ink seemed to pulse, seemed to breathe, seemed to be more alive than most of the people in the room. Rosie tilted her head left, then right, the way she did when she was trying to figure out the best angle to draw something. Because she had seen that tattoo before. Not this one. Not exactly, but close enough that her heart did a funny little skip she did not understand. Her mother had one, much smaller, faded by years and sun and the daily friction of a life spent working with her hands. It lived on the inside of her left wrist, usually hidden beneath a watch band or the sleeve of her scrubs. A skull in a helmet. Wings. Rosie had traced it with her fingertip once lying in bed, while her mother told her stories about the mountains and the stars and anything except what the tattoo meant. She had asked about it on a Tuesday in February because Tuesdays were the nights her mother came home early enough to tuck her in, and February was cold enough that they lay close together under the same blanket, and the tattoo was right there, inches from Rosie's face, and she was 9 years old, and 9-year-olds do not let mysteries sleep. Her mother had smiled that particular smile that adults use when the truth is too heavy for a child's arms. She had said, "It is a story for when you are older." And Rosie had accepted that because she loved her mother and because she believed that one day she would be old enough and the story would be worth the wait. But now, here, inches away from a version of that same tattoo, bigger and fiercer and glowing under diner lights like a beacon, Rosie felt something stir in her chest that was equal parts curiosity and recognition, and the unshakable 9-year-old certainty that this was important. The bikers spoke among themselves. Low voices, careful words. Rosie could not hear most of it, but fragments drifted to her table like smoke. The man across from Garrett, thick-necked, with a red bandana tied around his wrist, said something about a route, about getting close. Garrett nodded once, face unreadable. Another biker, the oldest of the group, leaned in. He had a silver beard that fell to his chest and eyes that had seen so many miles they seemed to carry distance in them. His name was Dutch, though Rosie did not know that yet. He spoke barely above a whisper. "If she is still around here, we will find her." 3 words about searching for someone. The adults in the diner heard fragments and assumed the worst, because when Hell's Angels are looking for someone, the assumption is never a birthday surprise. Rosie heard the words too, but understood none of the implication. She only knew they were looking for a girl, and this was interesting, the way all mysteries were interesting to a child who drew horses and mountains and her mother sleeping with one shoe on. Garrett took his coffee from Mr. Harlan's trembling hand. Steam rose over his thick gray beard. For 1 second, one brief second, his steel blue eyes flicked to Rosie. It was not a look of malice. It was not a look of anything, really just the automatic scan of a man who noticed everything and decided instantly what mattered and what did not. But that 1-second glance was enough to make the elderly woman at the next table clutch her purse strap with both hands. Rosie smiled at him. The youngest biker, a man in his late 20s with curly hair tied low at the nape of his neck, and a face that carried slightly less erosion than the others, noticed the smile. His name was Flint, and he had been riding with Garrett for 4 years, which in Hell's Angels terms made him practically a newborn. He leaned toward Garrett and whispered, "Kid is staring at you." Garrett did not turn. He sipped his coffee. "She is fine," he said in a voice that suggested the topic was closed. But Rosie was not fine in the way Garrett meant. She was not fine because the thing inside her chest, the curiosity, the recognition, had grown too large for her small body to contain. She looked at the tattoo. She looked at her sketchbook. She looked at the tattoo again. And then she did the thing that every adult in Pine Ridge Diner would later describe with the same breathless disbelief, as though witnessing a kitten walk up to a grizzly bear and tap it on the nose. Rosie pushed herself up on both hands, leaned slightly toward the large table, and spoke in a voice clear and bright as a bell rung on a winter morning. "Hello, sir. My mom has a tattoo just like yours." The words traveled across the table, crossed the gap between childhood and a world that no child should approach, and landed in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. Everything stopped. Garrett's coffee cup halted halfway to his lips. His eyes went wide for a fraction of a second, a crack in the stone face that none of his crew had seen in years. The biker mid-chew froze. The one drinking water set the glass down with exaggerated care as though it might explode. Flint's hand moved by pure reflex to the small knife handle at his belt. Not to draw, but because his body had been trained to respond to the unexpected, and this was the most unexpected thing that had happened to him since he first threw a leg over a Harley. Dutch's silver beard seemed to bristle. The thick-necked biker with the bandana stared at Rosie as though she had just pulled a live grenade from her backpack. Every eye in the biker group turned to one target. Rosie Beckett at 9 years old, lopsided ponytail, light blue hoodie with a fox patch her mother had sewn on the left pocket because the original zipper had broken, and Nora Beckett did not believe in throwing things away when a needle and thread still existed. Mr. Harlan behind the counter made a sound like a man who has just stepped on a nail but does not want to scream in church. He took a half step toward Rosie, one hand raised, mouth open, words refusing to form. "Rosie, sweetheart, do not," but the words came too late, and they would not have mattered anyway, because Rosie Beckett was 9, and she had asked a question, and she was waiting for an answer, and that was simply how things worked in her world. Garrett Slade placed his coffee cup on the table with a sound like a gavel. He turned his head toward Rosie, slowly. Not because he had not heard her, but because he needed the seconds to process what she had said to be certain his ears had not betrayed him. His steel blue eyes locked onto the girl. His thick brows drew together, casting shadow across the upper half of his face. The diner had achieved a silence so complete that the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen sounded like a jet engine. Garrett studied the child. Rosie studied him back, still smiling because she did not yet know that smiles could be the most dangerous weapons in rooms full of dangerous men. One of the older bikers seated at the far end of the table growled low. "What did she just say?" Rosie, delighted to have the attention, nodded eagerly. "My mom has the same tattoo, really, right here." She lifted her left hand and pointed to the inside of her wrist, exactly where she had seen it on her mother 100 times. "A skull with wings, just like yours." A chair somewhere in the diner scraped against the floor as someone pressed their back flat against the wall. A woman whispered something that might have been a prayer. Garrett inhaled slowly. He placed both hands on the table, fingers interlaced, and leaned forward with the deliberate weight of a man who had spent his life making other men flinch. But his voice, when it came, was not loud. It was low and controlled and sharp as a blade drawn across glass. "What did you say about your mom and my tattoo?" Rosie blinked. She did not understand why everyone was so serious. To her, this was a conversation about pictures on skin, no different than comparing drawings in a schoolyard. She swung her legs beneath the chair and answered with the uncomplicated honesty of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of truth. "My mom has a tattoo just like that one. A skull with a helmet and wings. She said somebody gave it to her a long time ago. She said she would tell me the story when I am older." Garrett's jaw tightened. He tilted his head just slightly, the way a predator adjusts its angle of observation. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "What is your mom's name?" Rosie sat up straight, her legs still swinging, voice as bright and careless as sunlight through a window. "Nora. Nora Beckett." The change that moved through the biker table was invisible but seismic. It traveled from man to man like a current through a wire. Garrett did not move, but something behind his eyes shifted, tight and focused. Three bikers exchanged glances in a language that had no words but centuries of practice. Dutch, the oldest, the one with the silver beard, squinted hard as though trying to read fine print written on the inside of his own memory. He spoke through clenched teeth, voice a low rasp. "Beckett. That name. Sounds familiar." 3 words. They made the thick air in the diner thicken further like humidity before a storm that has not yet chosen where to strike. A woman at the back table stood shakily, reaching for her purse. Mr. Harlan crouched slightly behind the counter, one eye visible above the register, watching the scene unfold with the terrified fascination of a man who has just realized his diner is ground zero for something he cannot stop and does not understand. Garrett tapped a finger on the table. Once. Not hard, but precise, like the click of a loaded chamber. He asked, "Where's your mom's tattoo?" Rosie brightened. "Here, sir." She lifted her left hand again, pointed to the wrist. "Mom said when she was young, she liked tough tattoos. She even showed me the skull with wings. It has sharp lines and the wings go out wide." The long-haired biker to Garrett's left placed his palm flat on the table with a sound like a muffled shot. His eyes narrowed, wide wings, black helmet, and a chip. Rosie's face lit up like someone had given her the answer key to a test she was not expecting. "Yes, there is a crack on the right wing. Tiny, but I can see it. Mom said the tattoo artist sneezed while he was working, and the needle slipped. She laughed when she told me." The silence that followed was unlike any that had come before it. This was not the silence of fear or uncertainty. This was the silence of recognition, of puzzle pieces sliding into place with a click that echoes through 12 years and 1,000 miles of desert road. Flint jumped up from his chair. The chair bounced back and hit the wall with a crack that made every customer in the diner flinch. His hand was on the knife grip, tight knuckles, white. His voice came fast and hard. "Boss, this sounds like a trap. No kid knows that detail unless—" Garrett raised one hand. The gesture was small, economical, barely a movement at all, but it hit Flint like a physical force. The young biker stopped mid-sentence. His mouth closed. He sat slowly, but his hand stayed near the blade because instinct is a tenant that does not accept eviction notices. Customers near the door began murmuring. A couple slid from their seats, whispering to each other. A father grabbed his young son's arm and pulled him toward the exit, knocking a tray of fries off the table in his haste. Chairs scraped, voices rose and fell. Pine Ridge Diner, which 5 minutes ago had been the quietest place in Flagstaff, was now a room full of people trying to decide between curiosity and survival. Rosie watched it all with the benign confusion of a child at an adult party where nobody is having fun. Garrett leaned closer to her, close enough that she could see the individual hairs in his beard, the lines carved into his face by decades of wind and sun, and decisions that left marks deeper than any tattoo. His voice dropped to a register that made the wood of the table seem to vibrate. Let me be clear, you say your mom's tattoo is identical to mine, and it has the chip on the right wing. Rosie nodded enthusiastic as a student who has just given the right answer. Yes, very similar. Mom said when she was young, she liked motorcycle people. A sharp exhale cut the air. Dutch pressed his fists against the table and stared at something only he could see. His voice was rough with memory. Beckett, Nora Beckett. I remember now. Vegas, 2012. Boss, she once saved one of ours. The air in the diner seemed to contract as though the room itself had taken a breath and was holding it. Dutch continued, his distant eyes fixed on a point 12 years and 400 miles away. A bad brawl, an ambush on the east side near the old warehouses. Decker was beaten half to death, dragged himself to a motel. There was a woman there, young, a nursing student. She opened her door and pulled him inside, stopped the bleeding with towels and rubbing alcohol. Hid him under the bed when the men who did it came looking room by room, banging on doors. Dutch paused. His silver beard trembled slightly. She stood at her door when they came, looked them straight in the eye, said she had not seen anyone. They believed her because she looked at them the way you look at patients, not criminals. She kept Decker alive for 3 days, fed him, bandaged him, gave him her only jacket when he got cold. Dutch looked at Garrett, and her tattoo had the chip on the right wing, because the artist sneezed. Who else has that specific flaw? But the woman who saved our brother Garrett's eyes had not left Rosie during the entire account. But something in them had changed. The cold assessment was gone. In its place was something older, deeper. Something that looked almost like awe, though that word sat uncomfortably on a face that had spent 60 years practicing its absence. He turned to Dutch. You are certain I have not forgotten a single detail of that night in 12 years, Dutch said. I will not start forgetting now. Garrett looked back at Rosie, his fingers unclasped on the table, his shoulders, which had been set like stone since he walked through the door, lowered by a fraction of an inch. Such a small movement, such an enormous shift. Flint's hand finally eased away from the knife. He exhaled through his nose, long and slow. If that is the case, the kid is not lying. The thick-necked biker with the bandana shook his head in something that was not quite disbelief, but was certainly neighboring it. Cannot fake that chip. Impossible. Garrett closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the steel was still there, but it had been tempered by something warmer. He looked at Rosie the way a man looks at a photograph from a time he thought was gone forever. Your mom, Garrett said. His voice had lost its gravel. Not entirely because some things are permanent, but enough that Rosie noticed the difference without knowing what it meant. Your mom is a good person. She saved one of our brothers. Her having a tattoo like mine is not coincidence. Rosie tilted her head. Her eyes were wide and bright as polished marbles. Really, my mom knows you guys. No one answered immediately. All 6 bikers looked at Garrett, because in their world, some questions could only be answered by one person, and that person had just heard a 9-year-old girl casually dismantle 12 years of buried debt. Garrett exhaled. The breath carried something heavy, something old, something he had been carrying since a phone call in the middle of a Nevada night told him that Decker was alive because a stranger with a nursing textbook and more courage than sense had pulled him out of the dark. More than knows, Garrett said. Your mom was someone we owed a debt to, and that debt has never been repaid. The silence that settled over the table was different from all the silences that had come before. This one held no threat, no suspicion, no fear. This one held recognition. The clicking together of 2 pieces of a story that had been told separately for over a decade, finally finding the seam where they fit. Customers in the diner did not fully understand what was happening, but they felt the shift the way animals feel a change in weather. A man lowered his bag. The woman in the corner exhaled. The air loosened, though not completely, because understanding a thing and being comfortable with it are 2 different achievements, and the first does not guarantee the second. Every biker at the table nodded, some once, some twice, all with the same gravity. An acknowledgement sealed a debt reaffirmed a chapter open that none of them had expected to read again. Mr. Harlan noticed the shift from behind his counter. He had watched it happen in real time the way you watch weather change through a window. 1 minute, storm clouds gathering, every muscle in the room coiled for violence. The next, something else entirely. Something he had no name for because, in 41 years of running a diner in a small Arizona town, he had never seen 6 of the most feared men in America look at a 9-year-old girl the way these men were looking at Rosie Beckett. With gratitude, with recognition, with the unmistakable expression of people who have just found something they had been searching for without knowing they were searching. And Rosie sat in the middle of it all, swinging her legs, holding her pencil, smiling. The uncomplicated smile of a child who had just made 6 new friends and did not understand why everyone was being so dramatic about it. Garrett turned his full attention to Rosie, and when he spoke, his voice held something that none of his crew had heard from him in years. Gentleness. Rosie, your mom, Nora Beckett, is she safe? Where does she work? It was not an interrogation. It was the kind of question a person asks about a relative they have not seen in too long and worry about in silence. Rosie smiled. She thought it was perfectly normal for adults to be concerned about her mom. Everyone seemed to worry about her mom, teachers, neighbors, Mr. Harlan, and now these big men in leather with loud motorcycles. My mom is coming to pick me up soon, Rosie said. She works at the hospital and then at the store, so she is always late. But she is really good. She always helps other people too, even when she is tired. Garrett nodded. The motion was slow and carried the weight of confirmation, as though the child had just validated something he already knew but needed to hear. Dutch leaned back in his chair. His eyes were far away again. Nora Beckett, he said quietly. She has not changed. Flint crossed his arms. For the first time since entering the diner, he looked something other than wary. He looked moved, though he would have denied it with his last breath. So the kid really is family, he said. Garrett looked at each of his men. His eyes carried an instruction that did not need words. They were to listen. They were to sit calm. They were to understand what he was about to say. He turned back to Rosie. The child in front of us is Nora Beckett's daughter, not the person we are looking for, not an enemy, not a stranger. This is the family of the woman who saved our brother. Every biker at the table nodded, some once, some twice, all with the same gravity. An acknowledgement sealed a debt, reaffirmed a chapter open that none of them had expected to read again. Garrett leaned back. His hands remained on the table, but they were open now, palms down, the posture of a man who had set aside his armor. His eyes drifted to the dark window where the Arizona night pressed against the glass like a living thing, and for a moment his face held the expression of a man looking backward through 12 years of road and dust and guilt. Rosie, he said, let me tell you a story. The other bikers went still. Even Flint, who was always moving, always adjusting, always touching something, settled into his chair. Like a child being told to sit down for something important. A story from 2012, Garrett said. In Las Vegas, the customers who had been edging toward the door stopped. Some sat back down, some leaned against walls. Mr. Harlan placed both hands flat on his counter and listened. Because whatever was happening at that table, it had changed shape in early, and the thing it had become was not something you walked away from. Rosie propped both elbows on her table, chin resting in her small hands, eyes enormous. She did not know that the story she was about to hear had been written in blood and survival, and the kind of luck that saints and sinners share in equal portions. Back then, Garrett began, one of our brothers named Decker was passing through the outskirts of Vegas. Simple trip, returning something to a friend, supposed to take less than 3 hours. He paused. The pause was heavy, but no one expected it to become an ambush. Dutch bowed his head. The thick-necked biker closed his eyes. Flint stared at the table. They attacked Decker on a dirt road near the old warehouses east of Vegas. Lights off. 4 men. They did not want police knowing. They wanted him dead on the spot. A customer at the back table covered her mouth with both hands. Rosie whispered, they really beat Uncle Decker. The name she gave him, Uncle Decker, created by instinct and innocence, hit the bikers like a gust of unexpected wind. Dutch's jaw tightened. Flint blinked rapidly. Even Garrett paused as though the word uncle had found a door he thought was locked and walked straight through it. Yeah, Garrett said. His voice was quieter now. Bad, really bad. Broken ribs, torn shoulder, bleeding so much he thought he was finished. But Decker was strong, always was, and he crawled. He dragged himself away from them, made it to an old motel about a quarter-mile from the warehouses. He was nearly gone, but he saw a small light in a window. Garrett looked at Rosie. That light was your mom's. Rosie's mouth opened. Her eyes went round as coins. My mom was there. Your mom was there, Garrett said. Nora Beckett, alone in a tiny motel room. A nursing student with a textbook and some cheap supplies and more courage than most men I have ever known. Decker knocked on her door. He did not knock so much as collapse into it. And you know what your mom did? Rosie shook her head, hands clasped tight against her chest. Your mom opened the door. She did not ask who he was. She was not scared of blood. She was not scared of tattoos. She was not scared of what people say about us. She was not scared of the dark, and she was not scared of getting involved. She pulled him inside, locked the door, and used everything she had in that room to stop his bleeding. Dutch spoke, his voice reverent as a hymn. If Nora had left Decker outside, he would be dead. No question. Garrett nodded. And that was not the end of it. The men who attacked him did not give up. They came to the motel. Room by room, banging doors, looking for the biker they had not finished killing. Rosie swallowed. What did my mom do? Your mom, Garrett said, and here his voice took on the quality of a man describing something sacred. Your mom hid Decker under the bed. She gave him her only blanket, and then she stood at her door and faced 4 men who had come to finish what they started. Flint leaned forward. She did not flinch. She did not look away. They asked if she had seen anyone. She said no. They stared into her eyes and they believed her. Because your mom looked at them the way she looks at everyone, without judgment, without fear, like they were human beings and she was simply telling the truth. Silence held the room. Rosie's eyes shimmered in the diner light. After that, Garrett continued, your mom took care of Decker for 3 days, bandaged his wounds, made him soup with whatever she had, fed him, kept him alive, kept him hidden. 3 days and 3 nights in a motel room the size of a closet with killers still looking. He paused again. This time the pause was tender. When Decker was strong enough to stand, he told your mom she had saved his life. He wanted to bring her to meet us, to thank her properly. But your mom refused. She did not want involvement. She did not want danger. She just said one thing. Rosie leaned forward, her entire small body vibrating with attention. She said, Garrett repeated his voice barely above a whisper. Please live kindly. Do not let anyone die anymore. The words hung in the air like something visible. Rosie's lips parted, but no sound came. Around the diner, hardened faces softened. The woman at the back table pressed a napkin to her eyes. Mister. Harlan removed his glasses and wiped them, though they were not foggy. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow its tired rotation, as though the story deserved more time than the room was accustomed to giving. And Decker, Garrett said, tracing the edge of his own tattoo with one thick finger, gave your mom a tattoo, a variant of our traditional design. Not to mark membership, not to show off, but to protect. Rosie tilted her head. Protect, how Garrett answered. In our world, that tattoo is a promise. If any Hell's Angel anywhere sees someone wearing that tattoo, that person is protected. No one will harm them. No one dares touch the one who saved our brother. That tattoo means she belongs to us and we belong to her, and the road between us is sacred. The diner was motionless. Rosie's eyes glistened. Her lower lip trembled. Not from fear, never from fear. From something much larger than fear. She whispered, almost inaudible, my mom is a hero, sir. Garrett Slade looked at Rosie Beckett, 9 years old, lopsided ponytail, fox patch, hoodie sketchbook. Full of horses and mountains and her mother sleeping with one shoe on. And for the first time that evening he smiled. Small, brief, warm as a struck match in a cold wind. Yeah, Rosie, in our world your mom is a hero. And that sentence at that exact moment in that small diner in Flagstaff, Arizona, changed how Rosie Beckett saw her mother forever. The emotion was still settling across the room, warm and heavy as a blanket laid over sleeping shoulders, when the phone in Rosie's backpack screamed to life. She startled, fumbled through the cloth bag her mother had sewn, the one with the fox patch and the broken zipper. Her fingers found the phone. The screen flashed mom, and the signal icon pulsed weak and uncertain. Rosie answered. Mom, are you here? Nora's voice came through fractured, chopped by static. Rosie, can you hear me? Mom, yes, I can hear you. Where are you? Car broke down, dark road. The voice dissolved into a screech of interference like nails dragged across a speaker. Then Nora's voice returned, and this time it was shaking. There is someone approaching. I do not know who. Rosie, listen to me. Do not leave the diner. Do you hear me? Stay inside. The signal dropped. The screen went dark. Rosie stared at the phone. The screen had become a small black mirror reflecting her own face back to her, and in it she saw something she did not recognize. Fear. Real fear, the kind that does not come from dark rooms or thunderstorms or scary movies, but from the understanding sudden and complete that the person you love most in the world is somewhere in the dark and you cannot reach them. Mom. She pressed the phone to her ear. Mom, nothing. Mom. She stood up from her chair so fast it nearly tipped. Her hands shook, her voice cracked open. My mom is in trouble. Every head in the diner turned. The long-haired biker rose to half standing. Flint was on his feet in one violent motion, fists clenched at his sides. Dutch reached for his jacket. Garrett turned his head. Slow measured the way a man turns when he has heard something that changes the shape of the night. He looked at Rosie and his voice dropped to the register that his crew knew meant decisions were being made that could not be undone. Let me hear. Rosie handed him the phone with trembling hands. Garrett looked at the dead screen, the lost signal icon, and then at the child. What did you hear? Rosie swallowed. Her voice was small and cracked, but she held it together the way she had seen her mother hold things together 1,000 times before. My mom is stuck. Her car broke down on a dark road. She said strangers are approaching her. Then the call cut off. Flint exhaled like he had been punched. Dutch muttered something ancient and profane under his breath. The thick-necked biker's hands went flat on the table as though bracing for impact. Mr. Harlan spoke from behind his counter, his voice a hopeful quaver. Could just be someone wanting to help Good Samaritans. Flint shook his head. Nobody wanders 89A after dark without a reason. If she sounded scared, there is a reason she sounded scared. Garrett stood. The motion was not fast, but it was absolute. He rose from his chair and his shadow fell across the table, across the floor, across the face of every person in the room. He was not just tall, standing with purpose, with the full weight of 60 years and uncountable miles behind him. He was a force that the small diner could barely contain. He looked at his crew, each man in turn. His eyes carried the oldest instruction in their vocabulary, the one that needed no words, the one that meant everything. We owe her. 3 words. They landed on the table and on the tile floor and on the hearts of 6 men who had spent their lives being owed things, but rarely owing them. 3 words that carried 12 years of unfinished business of a debt accumulated in a motel room in Las Vegas, where a young woman with a nursing textbook chose courage over safety, chose a stranger over herself, chose to open a door when every survival instinct in the human body was screaming at her to keep it shut. No one objected. No one hesitated. 6 men who had entered the diner like a storm and frightened every soul inside it now rose from their seats with a different energy entirely. Not menace. Purpose. The silver-bearded Dutch pulled on his leather jacket with the efficiency of a soldier donning armor. Flint snatched his helmet from the seat. The thick-necked biker checked his chain. The long-haired one cracked his knuckles and rolled his neck. Metal sounds, boot steps, belt buckles ringing in rapid sequence. Garrett knelt in front of Rosie. He brought himself to her level. His face, scarred and weathered and built for intimidation, held something that Rosie would carry in her memory for the rest of her life. Kindness, Rosie, he said. His voice was the gentlest sound he had made in years. You are not going out alone. We will find your mom. Rosie looked up at him. Her lip trembled. Her eyes were red and wet, but she did not cry. Not yet. Instead, she asked the question that would launch 6 Harley-Davidsons into the Arizona night. You will help my mom. Garrett nodded. Not just help. We are repaying a debt that has been hanging for 12 years. Flint crouched beside them. No one touches Nora Beckett's people, he said. Not while we are alive. Another biker, the one with the red bandana, added with a voice that was half smile and half growl. Whoever is out there had better be ready for what is coming. Mr. Harlan stumbled out from behind the counter. Are you really going? Garrett turned his head. One look silenced the old man. Mr. Harlan, hold the diner. Keep everyone safe. We handle the rest. Then Garrett looked back at Rosie. You brave enough to come with us? We can find your mom faster if you show us where she usually drives. Rosie did not hesitate, not for one heartbeat. She grabbed her backpack, slung it over her shoulders, and stood as tall as a 9-year-old girl in a fox patch hoodie could stand. Yes, she said, I am going. Flint reached into a saddlebag and produced the group's smallest helmet. It was still too large for Rosie, but he adjusted the strap and placed it on her head with a care that contradicted every assumption the diner customers had made about him. 2 bikes with the kid Garrett ordered. 3 ahead for clearing. I take the rear. Everyone nodded. Orders exchanged fast and clean as military protocol. They stepped out. Pine Ridge Diner's neon sign cast long shadows of 6 towering bikers arranged around a tiny girl in a light blue hoodie. The image was absurd. The image was magnificent. The image was something that every person watching from inside the diner would describe to their friends, their families, their grandchildren, and not a single one of them would be believed. A woman pressed to the window whispered, they are really going to protect the little girl. The old man at the counter, the one who had lowered his newspaper when the bikers first walked in, spoke softly. Not just the girl. They are protecting their debt. Mr. Harlan stood in the doorway, arms folded across his apron, watching the formation assemble in his parking lot. In 41 years, he had seen a lot of things leave that parking lot. Cars and trucks, and one memorable evening, a man on a horse who had gotten lost coming back from a ranch wedding. But he had never seen 6 Hells Angels bikers escort a little girl into the night like a royal guard, and he understood with perfect clarity that he never would again. Garrett donned his helmet, his Harley engine erupted, and the ground trembled beneath it. He looked at Rosie standing beside Flint's bike. He gave a single chin nod. Rosie climbed on behind Flint, her small arms wrapped around his back. She held on the way her mother once held on to the door of a motel room in Las Vegas with everything she had. The helmet was too big and slid slightly forward, and Flint reached back with one hand and adjusted it without looking, a gesture so casual and so protective that Mr. Harlan, watching from the doorway, had to look away for a moment. 6 Harley engines fired in unison. The sound shattered the desert silence and scattered it like glass. Headlight beams cut the night in 6 white spears aimed at the darkness that held Nora Beckett somewhere in its grip. The pack moved as one. 3 bikes ahead, spreading their light across Highway 89A like searchlights, sweeping a dark ocean. Flint and Rosie in the center, guarded, shielded, carried. And Garrett at the rear, his single yellow headlight flickering in the wind like the calm eye of a storm, watching everything missing, nothing carrying the weight of a promise he had waited more than a decade to keep. Garrett spoke the last words before the pack left the lot behind and the darkness swallowed them whole. Find Nora Beckett at any cost. And under the rising moon of the Arizona desert, 6 Hells Angels Harleys surged forward like a steel storm, carrying a 9-year-old girl and a promise that had waited 12 years to be kept. The Arizona desert at night was not simply dark. It was a darkness with weight, with texture, with depth that swallowed headlights and gave nothing back. The kind of dark that made you understand why ancient people invented gods, because something that vast and that indifferent to human presence needed a name, needed to be explained, needed to be bargained with. 6 Harley Davidsons tore through it like bright wounds in the skin of the night. The formation was tight, practiced, instinctive. 3 lid bikes spread across the 2-lane highway, their headlights fanning out like searchlights, sweeping a black ocean. Every shadow got illuminated. Every bush, every saguaro, every mile marker received its half-second of white scrutiny before the darkness took it back. In the center, Flint's Harley carried Rosie the girl, pressed against his back like a small, warm engine of her own, her borrowed helmet slightly too large, her hands gripping the leather of his jacket with a strength that surprised him. And at the rear, Garrett rode alone, his single yellow headlight, a steady, unwavering eye watching the road ahead and the road behind with equal attention. Rosie's heart hammered against Flint's spine, not from fear of the motorcycle or the speed or the darkness pressing in from every side. From the phone call, from the sound of her mother's voice cracking like thin ice over deep water. From the image her mind kept producing, unbidden and relentless, of Nora Beckett, standing alone on a dark road with strangers approaching and no one to help. Wind slapped Rosie's face. Her ponytail whipped behind her like a small flag. She ducked closer to Flint's back. Flint felt the girl tighten her grip. He spoke over his shoulder loud enough to clear the engine noise. "All good, kid. We will find your mom quick." He believed it. He had to believe it. Because the alternative was a thought he could not afford to carry at 70 miles per hour or on a desert highway with a child on the back of his bike. The road stretched ahead like a dark river, Highway 89. North of Flagstaff was a road built for people who had somewhere to be, and no patience for scenery, a two-lane strip of aging asphalt that cut through desert and scrubland with the indifference of a knife through paper. No streetlights, no guardrails, no houses for miles. Just the road and the dark and the ancient rock formations that rose on either side like the walls of a cathedral that had lost its roof to time. Rosie had never moved this fast in her life. The world was a blur of shadow and headlight and wind. She pressed her face against Flint's jacket and tried to think of her mother, of the way Nora smiled when she was tired, of the way she hummed in the kitchen while making breakfast at 5 in the morning, of the way she always came back no matter how late, no matter how hard the day. She would come back this time too. She had to. The pack had been riding for 12 minutes when Garrett saw it. A light, small yellow intermittent about half a mile behind them. It had not been there when they left the Pine Ridge Diner parking lot. It had not been there when they hit the highway on-ramp. But it was there now, holding distance with the precision of something that did not want to be noticed but could not help being seen. Garrett tilted his head. He eased back on the throttle just slightly enough to let a gap open between himself and the rest of the formation, enough to observe. The light held its position, not closing, not falling back, matching their speed exactly. That was not the behavior of a lost driver. That was not the behavior of a late commuter. That was the behavior of someone who was following. Garrett flashed his headlight twice, a signal the group had used for 30 years. Got a tail. The response was immediate. Dutch, riding second in the lead formation, checked his rearview mirror. The thick-necked biker adjusted his position. Flint felt the formation shift around him, a subtle tightening like a fist closing halfway. Flint glanced back at Garrett, just half a second. But Garrett's face in the yellow glow of his own headlight said everything words could not. Keep the kids safe. Flint gripped the handlebars tighter. The Harley's engine deepened as he pushed the throttle forward. Rosie felt his body tense beneath her hands. "Sir, what is wrong?" Flint would not scare her. "Nothing, kid. Hold tight." Behind them, the yellow light persisted. Garrett watched it with the patient scrutiny of a man who had been followed before, who had been hunted before, who understood the mathematics of pursuit the way some men understood cards or weather or the Bible. The desert road narrowed as it climbed toward a series of sharp curves. The long-haired biker at the front of the formation signaled slow. The pack eased. Engines dropped from a roar to a deep, rhythmic growl. The curves unwound beneath their wheels, red rock walls rising on one side, black emptiness falling away on the other. Garrett did not slow. He held speed, watching the tail. The sedan matched the pack's deceleration with mechanical precision. When they slowed, it slowed. When they accelerated out of a curve, it accelerated. Mirror behavior. Deliberate. Calculated. The long-haired biker's voice crackled through the small intercom system clipped inside their helmets. "It is really tailing us." Garrett's voice came back low and steady as the road itself. "If it is the one who panicked, Nora, it will not quit." Rosie pressed against Flint's back, heard the rumble of Garrett's voice through the wind and the engine noise. She could not make out the words, but she could feel the change in his tone, the way it shifted from calm command to something harder, something edged, something that sounded like a man stepping into a fight he had been preparing for all his life. The curve opened. Ahead, red blinking lights marked a construction zone. Reduced speed signs, rough earth, unfinished shoulder. The long-haired biker shouted a warning. The pack leaned and navigated with the fluid coordination of birds in formation, each bike finding its line through the disrupted road surface. But at the rear, Garrett had to choose. The construction zone had narrowed the road to a single passable lane, and the sedan was closing the gap. Garrett saw the obstacle, calculated the angle, and chose. He leaned his Harley nearly horizontal. The foot peg struck asphalt and threw a shower of bright sparks into the night like falling stars. He twisted through the gap like a blade turning in a lock, emerged clean on the other side, and did not slow down. The sedan behind was less skilled or less lucky. It lurched brakes, screaming tires, sliding on loose dirt. A cloud of red dust erupted behind it. The vehicle did not flip, but it shuddered to a near stop, its hood pointed at an ugly angle toward the ditch. Flint exhaled. Got them. We lost Garrett, cut him off. Still on. In his mirror through the settling dust, the sedan straightened. Its lights came back. Its engine whined as it accelerated again, resuming the same measured distance behind them, patient as a predator that knows it does not need to rush because the night is long and the road has only one direction. Garrett spoke, and this time his voice was flat as a desert horizon. Not coincidence. Not random. That car wants where we are going, Dutch growled. Plate, can we get a read? The thick-necked biker shrugged his head without turning. Lost it. Dust and no light. Rosie pressed her cheek against Flint's leather jacket. She could smell the road on him, dust and oil, and the cold metal scent of engine heat. Sir, she asked, her voice small against the wind, is that the person who scared my mom? Flint did not answer immediately. Then careful and steady, do not know, but we will not let anyone touch your mom. Or you. Remember that. Ahead, the highway opened into a long, straight stretch. The moon had risen higher, casting pale silver light across the desert floor. Saguaros stood like sentinels along the roadside, their arms raised in gestures that looked like surrender or prayer, depending on how you chose to see them. The long-haired biker's voice came through the intercom. Intersection ahead. If Nora is stuck somewhere on 89A, it is probably near here. Garrett pushed forward. 6 Harleys reformed into an arrowhead, lights piercing the darkness like spears aimed at the heart of whatever waited. And then Flint saw it. Someone ahead. His voice cut through the engine noise like a knife. The headlights swept hard right as the formation adjusted, flooding the pitch-black roadside with brilliant white light. A car, an old blue sedan, parked at a crooked angle on the shoulder, its driver's door flung open. Hazard lights blinking weakly as though the battery was dying. The hood was propped up, a thin trail of dark fluid running from beneath the engine block into the red dirt, black as old blood in the headlight glare. And in the wash of 6 Harley headlights, Rosie saw her mother. Nora Beckett was backing away from the car, step by step, her hands raised in front of her, her face twisted with fear so pure it made her look like a stranger. She was wearing scrubs from the hospital, still the blue ones with the small tear on the left pocket that she kept meaning to mend. Her hair had come loose from its clip and hung around her face in dark strands. A man stood before her, not staggering, not drunk, cold, sober, and terrifyingly calm. He was tall, thick through the shoulders, with a shaved head and a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and bad intentions. In his right hand, he held a short iron bar, and he held it the way a man holds a tool he is comfortable with, loosely, easily, like an extension of his arm. A second man stood by a dark sedan, parked further up the shoulder, leaning against the hood, arms crossed, watching. Smaller, wiry, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He did not hold a weapon, but his posture said he did not need one. He was the kind of man who watched while others did the work and called it supervision. The tall man spoke. His voice was hard and controlled. I told you not to run. You think you can just drive away from what you owe? You think 12 years makes it disappear? Nora stepped back. Her foot caught a rock. She stumbled, caught herself, kept her hands up. Please, I do not know what you are talking about. Please just leave us alone. The man with the iron bar laughed. It was not a kind sound. Leave you alone. I just got out. 14 months looking for you. 14 months learning where you went. You think I would walk away now? Rosie screamed. The sound came from her chest before her brain could stop it, small and sharp and bright as breaking glass. Mom! Nora's head snapped toward the sound, toward the blinding wall of Harley headlights bearing down on her section of road. Her eyes went wide, flooding with too many things at once, relief and terror and confusion, because she did not know whose lights those were, only that they were coming fast and loud, and her daughter's voice had just come from somewhere inside them. Garrett did not hesitate. He did not analyze. He did not weigh options or calculate risks or consult the men riding beside him. He read the scene in less than a second, the way a man reads a page he has seen before, and his body moved with the certainty of instinct refined by 44 years on the road. The moment was almost too familiar. A woman in danger, a dark road, strangers with bad intentions. 12 years ago, Nora Beckett had stood between Decker and death. Tonight, Garrett Slade would stand between Nora and whatever this man planned to do with that iron bar. His Harley surged forward. The engine screamed. He closed the distance to the man with the iron bar in seconds that felt like hours, leaned the bike hard, planted one boot on the asphalt, and brought the Harley to a controlled stop directly between the man and Nora Beckett. The bike formed a wall of chrome and black steel, and behind it, Garrett's shadow fell across the roadside like a judgment. "Step back." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried across the desert air with the authority of a man who had never in his life needed to repeat himself and had no intention of starting now. The tall man with the iron bar stumbled backward. The headlights from 6 motorcycles hit him full in the face, and for the first time, his confidence cracked. He squinted, threw up his free hand. "Who the hell?" The words died in his mouth as Flint and 2 more bikers skidded to a stop behind Garrett, forming an iron arc around Nora. Dutch stepped off his bike and stood to his full height, which was considerable, and stared at the man, the way an old wolf stares at something it has not yet decided whether to eat. The man with the iron bar looked around. 6 leather-clad men, tattoos, Harleys, eyes that reflected the headlights like animal eyes in a forest. The second man by the dark sedan straightened from his lean against the hood, his casual posture evaporating like water on hot asphalt. He took a step toward the driver's door. Dutch spoke. His voice was cold and measured the voice of a man who has spent 62 years learning the difference between patience and weakness. "A woman alone on a dark road, and you bring an iron bar. That is not a conversation. That is a threat." The tall man's lip curled, but his eyes were moving, counting, measuring. He was calculating odds the way a gambler calculates cards, and the table was showing him nothing but losing hands. 6 bikers, 6 Harleys, 6 sets of hands that had clearly done harder work than holding iron bars on dark roadsides. "I just want what she owes," he said, and the words sounded hollow even to him. Nora, still behind Garrett's, Harley called out. Her voice was thin but fierce, the voice of a woman who had just watched danger approach and had no intention of bowing to it. "I do not owe you anything. I have never seen you before in my life." The tall man turned his head toward her. His eyes narrowed. "You do not remember me," he said. "But I remember you. I remember everything." Flint stepped over the man's dark sedan in 2 long strides and snatched the keys from the ignition with a move so fast the wiry man in the baseball cap could only gape. Flint pocketed the keys and turned to face the tall man. "Nobody owes you anything tonight." The tall man looked at the iron bar in his hand, then at the 6 men surrounding him, then at the iron bar again. He lowered it slowly, the way you lower a flag when the battle is clearly lost. Garrett spoke, each word distinct, heavy, final. "No one touches Nora Beckett's family." The words landed on the roadside with the weight of a verdict. Every biker behind Garrett stood a little taller. Flint positioned himself between Nora and the tall man, his body a wall of leather and resolve. The thick-necked biker moved wide, cutting off any retreat toward the dark sedan. The wiry man by the sedan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He was watching, measuring, but he said nothing, and in the chaos of light and leather and confrontation, no one paid him the attention he would later prove he deserved. And then the tall man did something that changed the shape of the night. He looked at Garrett's arm, at the tattoo, the skull with wings, and he smiled. Not a warm smile, not a defeated smile, a smile of recognition. "Well," he said. His voice dropped to a register that was almost intimate. "So the Hells Angels are here. How perfect. The last time someone from your club ruined my plans was in Vegas, and it was her who made it possible." Garrett's eyes narrowed. The man dropped the iron bar. It clanged on the asphalt with a sound that echoed off the rock walls like a bell. He raised both hands, palms out, the universal gesture of surrender, but his eyes were not surrendering. His eyes were smiling. "My name is Wade Loomis," he said. "And 12 years ago, 4 of my guys had your friend Decker on the ground ready to finish the job, ready to send a message that your club would have heard from Vegas to Virginia. And then this woman," he pointed at Nora, "this nursing student in a motel room, opened her door and pulled him inside, and my boys came back empty-handed, and I went to prison for a different job 6 months later, and I have spent every day since then thinking about the woman who cost me everything." He said the last 3 words the way some men say a prayer. With absolute conviction and a patience that had outlasted concrete walls and iron bars and over a decade of sitting in a cell with nothing but a name and a grudge for company. The words fell on the roadside like stones thrown into water. Ripples spread through the biker group. Dutch's face went hard as granite. Flint's hand moved to his belt. The thick-necked biker took a step forward, his chain visible in the headlights. Garrett did not move. But his voice when it came was the coldest thing in the Arizona night. "You came here for Nora Beckett." Wade nodded. "I found out where she went. Flagstaff, new name, new life. Took 14 months after my release to track her. Cut the oil line on her car this afternoon. Waited for it to strand her on a dark stretch. Simple plan, patient plan." Nora behind Garrett's bike made a sound. Small, broken. The sound of a woman who had spent 12 years running from a shadow and had just learned the shadow had been walking behind her the entire time. Garrett studied Wade Loomis the way a surgeon studies an x-ray. Calm, thorough, missing nothing. Then he turned his head slightly toward Dutch. "Call it in." Dutch already had his phone out. He dialed 911 with thick fingers and reported the situation in a voice as calm as if he were ordering coffee. "Armed man threatening a woman on the shoulder of 89A near mile marker 12. Yes, we have his weapon secured, no injuries. We will hold the scene." Wade stood with his hands raised, but his smile had not faded. It lived on his face like a stain that soap could not reach. He looked at Nora through the gap between Garrett's bike and Flint's shoulder. "You think this is over," he said. "You think your biker friends change anything. I waited 12 years. I can wait." The sentence never finished. The wiry man in the baseball cap moved. He had been standing by the dark sedan, silent and still, and in the chaos of the confrontation, he had edged closer to the open passenger side door, closer to where Rosie stood half hidden behind Flint's bike, her borrowed helmet still on her head, her backpack still on her shoulders, her eyes locked on her mother. He moved fast, faster than anyone expected from a man who had been standing still for 5 minutes. His arms shot out, grabbed Rosie by the strap of her backpack, and yanked her off her feet. The girl yelped. The sound was swallowed by the wind and the idling engines, and by the time Flint spun around, the wiry man had Rosie in the passenger seat of the dark sedan, had thrown himself behind the wheel and was reaching for the ignition. The keys were gone. Flint had them. But the wiry man had a second set taped to the underside of the dashboard because Wade Loomis was not a man who left a plan with only one exit. The engine turned over. The headlights blazed. The sedan lurched forward with a spray of gravel that pinged off Harley chrome like buckshot. Rosie screamed, not the small, bright sound from before. This was a scream that came from the deepest part of a child's understanding that something terrible was happening, that the world had just shifted beneath her feet, and that the person she needed most was getting smaller in the rear window. The scream hit every adult on that roadside like a physical blow. "Mom." The word hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the sedan's engine drowned it in noise and distance. Nora Beckett heard her daughter's voice disappear into the darkness, and the sound broke something inside her that had been holding everything together for 12 years. Every sacrifice, every late night, every early morning, every moment she had told herself that running was enough, that hiding was protection, that if she just worked hard enough and stayed quiet enough and kept her head down long enough, the past would forget about her. All of it shattered in the space between one heartbeat and the next because her daughter was in that car and her daughter was screaming and nothing else in the world had ever mattered or would ever matter again. She dropped to her knees on the asphalt, hands pressed to the road as though the ground itself might give her an answer. Then she stood, and then she ran, not away from the danger, toward it. She ran past Garrett's bike. She ran past Dutch, past the thick-necked biker, past the long-haired one who reached for her arm and missed. She ran toward Garrett himself, who was already straddling his Harley, already firing the engine, already turning the bike toward the darkness where the sedan's taillights were shrinking like two red eyes closing. "Take me with you," Nora said. Her voice was ragged, destroyed, rebuilt from pure will. "That is my daughter. I am going." Garrett looked at her for 1 second. 1 second in which he saw everything: the nursing student in the motel, the woman who faced killers, the mother who worked 2 jobs, the hero who wanted no credit. He saw all of it in her face and he nodded once. Get on. Nora climbed behind Garrett. She had not been on a motorcycle since she was 19 years old, a different life in a different city with a boy whose name she could no longer remember. But her body remembered the motion, the way you swing your leg over, the way you settle your weight, the way you wrap your arms around someone else's torso and trust them with the physics of your survival. Her arms locked around Garrett with the grip of a woman who had already lost everything once and would not survive losing it again. Garrett twisted the throttle. The Harley screamed and lunged forward, and behind them, the rest of the pack followed. 5 Harleys in one mission. Dutch stayed with Wade Loomis, holding the scene for the police, holding the man's wrists together behind his back with a grip that neither age nor mercy could loosen. The chase began. The sedan's taillights disappeared around the first bend before Garrett's Harley even reached full speed. But sound travels in the desert, and the whine of the sedan's engine bounced off the rock walls on either side of the road, giving Garrett a map of distance and direction that was almost as good as sight. Nora pressed her face against Garrett's back. The leather of his jacket was cold against her cheek and smelled like a lifetime she had spent 12 years trying to forget. Engine oil and road dust and the faint sweet rot of aged hide. She closed her eyes and felt the motorcycle beneath her, the violent vibration of the engine traveling through her bones, and she thought of Rosie. Only of Rosie. Every other thought was luxuries she could not afford. The sedan was fast, but the desert road was not its friend. Curves that a motorcycle could lean through like water through a bend forced the car to brake and steer and lose precious seconds. The wiry man drove with the desperate competence of someone who had done this before, but the headlights behind him multiplied in his mirrors, and the engine noise behind him grew, and the distance between hunter and hunted was shrinking with every mile. Flint rode low and hard, his Harley eating the road in long, hungry gulps. Without Rosie on the back, his bike was lighter, faster, angrier. He pulled ahead of the formation riding point, his headlight locked on the sedan's taillights, like a predator tracking blood. The thick-necked biker flanked wide on the left, taking the oncoming lane on the straight stretches, ready to close the gap from the side. The long-haired biker held the right weaving between shoulder and lane with the fluid precision of a man who had spent more of his life on 2 wheels than on 2 feet. They rode in formation the way wolves run. No wasted movement, no communication necessary. Each man reading the road and the others and acting before the thought fully formed. Garrett held center, Nora behind him, his Harley the heaviest and the loudest, the sound of its engine, a declaration that whatever lay ahead would not be faced by the sedan alone. Rosie sat in the passenger seat, her backpack pressed against the door. Her helmet, Flint's helmet, the one that was too big for her, had fallen off during the grab and lay somewhere on the highway behind them, lost to the dark. She was breathing hard. Her hands shook. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She was 9 years old. She was terrified. And she was thinking, because Rosie Beckett was her mother's daughter, and her mother's daughter did not freeze. Her mother had opened a door for a dying stranger. Her mother had faced 4 killers with nothing but her voice and her eyes. Her mother had said 2 words and saved a life. Garrett had told her that story less than 2 hours ago, and it had entered Rosie's bloodstream like medicine, and it was working now in the worst moment of her 9 years on Earth. It was working. She was scared. She was so scared that her fingernails had left small crescents in the palms of her hands from clenching. But underneath the fear, in the place where her mother's stories lived, where the memory of being held and loved and told she was brave lived, there was something else. Something that felt like a small, steady flame that the fear could not reach. Rosie could not say 2 words to the man driving this car. He was focused on the road, muttering into a phone that had no signal, cursing the desert and the curves and the bikers in his mirror. He was not looking at her. She looked at the dashboard, at the steering wheel, at the door, at the hazard light button, bright orange, with the triangle symbol, the one she had seen her mother press 100 times when the old blue sedan stalled on the side of the road. The button that made the lights blink. The signal that said, "Here I am stopped, I need help." Rosie did not need help. Rosie needed to be found. She reached forward, slowly, carefully. The way you reach for something when a single wrong movement will end the chance. Her fingers found the button. She pressed it. The hazard lights activated. Both taillights began to blink in steady rhythm, bright orange pulses cutting through the desert dark like a heartbeat made visible. The wiry man did not notice. He was watching the road, watching the mirrors, watching the Harleys that were now close enough for their headlights to wash over the interior of the sedan. He was calculating escape routes. He was not looking at his dashboard. Behind him, Garrett saw the blinking. He saw the pattern change from solid red taillights to pulsing orange, and he understood. He understood because he had spent his life reading signals, interpreting the language of lights and sound and movement that the road speaks to those who listen. The kid, Garrett said, his voice carrying to Nora behind him. She turned on the hazard lights. She is telling us where she is. Nora's grip tightened, a sob caught in her throat. My girl, my brave girl. Garrett pushed the Harley harder. The engine noise rose to a pitch that seemed to vibrate the very air. He signaled to Flint, who had pulled alongside on his right. Flint understood without words. He accelerated, pulled ahead, and began to close on the sedan from the right side. The thick-necked biker took the left. The sedan was boxed, three sides covered. The only direction left was forward, and forward led to a long, straight stretch that ended at a T intersection where the road split into two narrow dirt paths, neither of which a sedan could handle at speed. The wiry man saw the bikes closing and made his decision. He would run the intersection. He would take the dirt path. He would lose them in the desert. He accelerated. The sedan roared. Rosie grabbed the door handle and held on because the car was moving in ways that cars are not meant to move, swerving and shaking and making sounds from its undercarriage that sounded like metal bones breaking. The intersection appeared in the headlights. The wiry man turned the wheel hard right. Too hard. The sedan hit the transition from asphalt to dirt, and the back end broke loose. The car fishtailed, throwing a wave of red dust into the air. The wiry man fought the wheel, overcorrected, and the sedan spun a full quarter turn before the front tires found purchase on something solid, and the vehicle slid with a grinding screech into the shallow drainage ditch that ran along the desert road. It stopped. Tilted at an angle, the passenger side higher than the driver's side, the whole machine leaning toward the ditch like a ship taking on water. Engine still running. Wheels still spinning against nothing. Dust hanging in the headlight beams like a curtain drawn between one world and the next. Rosie had braced herself against the door with both hands. The impact had thrown her sideways, and her shoulder ached where it had hit the window frame, but she was upright. She was conscious. She was alive. She could see headlights in the mirrors. She could hear engines growing louder. She could feel the car settling into the ditch with slow terminal resignation. The wiry man cursed. He reached for the gear shift. Flint was there first. His Harley skidded to a stop 6 feet from the sedan. He was off the bike before it finished moving his boots, hitting the dirt in a dead sprint, his hand reaching the driver's door before the wiry man could find reverse. Flint opened the door. His fist found the man's collar. He pulled him out of the car with the efficient violence of someone removing a splinter, quick and decisive and without ceremony. The wiry man hit the ground. He tried to stand. Flint's boot on his chest changed his mind. On the other side of the car, Nora was already off Garrett's bike, already running. Her feet hit dirt, and she stumbled, and she ran, and she stumbled again, and she kept running because nothing in the physical world, not gravity, not exhaustion, not the desert itself, was going to stop Nora Beckett from reaching her daughter. She wrenched the passenger door open. Rosie was there, small, shaking eyes enormous in the headlight, glare hands still gripping the door handle, alive unhurt. Present. Mom. The word broke open. Rosie threw herself into her mother's arms with a force that nearly knocked Nora off her feet. Nora caught her, held her, pressed her daughter against her chest so tightly that their heartbeats merged into a single rapid rhythm. I got you. Nora's voice was broken glass and warm honey, destroyed and healing at the same time. I got you. You are safe. I'm here. Rosie buried her face in her mother's scrubs. The fabric smelled like hospital soap and the store's cleaning supplies, and underneath both like home. She sobbed, and the sobs shook her entire body, and Nora held her through every tremor. Mom, I was so scared. I thought he was going to take me away forever. No one is taking you anywhere. Nora pulled back enough to see her daughter's face. She cupped Rosie's cheeks in both hands. Not tonight, not ever. Rosie looked up through her tears. I turned on the hazard lights so they could find us, like you do when the car breaks down. I remembered, Mom. Nora stared at her daughter. For a moment she could not speak. because what she was looking at was not just a 9-year-old girl, it was courage. The same courage that had opened a motel door in Las Vegas 12 years ago. The same courage that had faced down killers with 2 words and steady eyes. The same courage that Nora had carried alone for so long, she had forgotten it was inheritable. Her daughter had it. Her daughter had always had it. You, Nora whispered, her voice cracking around the edges. You are the bravest person I have ever known. Behind them, the bikers had the situation secured. Flint held the wiry man on the ground. The thick-necked biker stood over him. Garrett remained on his Harley for a moment longer, watching mother and daughter, his expression unreadable, in the headlight glare before he killed his engine and walked to them. The desert had gone quiet again. The wind blew soft and cold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and another answered, and the sound was lonely and ancient and exactly right. Garrett stood beside Nora and Rosie. He did not speak immediately. He let the moment exist because some moments need silence the way fire needs air. Then he placed one hand on Nora's shoulder. He is finished, Garrett said. Both of them. Wade is held at the scene. This one is going nowhere. Police are on their way. Nora looked up at him. Her face was streaked with tears and dust, in the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending 12 years running and suddenly being told you can stop. Wade Loomis, she said. The name came out flat, drained of emotion, the way you say the name of a disease you have lived with so long. It no longer has power to shock. He found me. He found you. Garrett confirmed. And we found him. Nora closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were clear. He cut my oil line. He has been watching me. How long I do not know. But he planned this, all of it. The car breaking down, the dark road. He wanted me alone. Garrett nodded. That matches what he said. 14 months of tracking after his release. Nora pulled Rosie closer. The girl had stopped crying but had not loosened her grip. Rosie, there are things I have never told you. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I thought you were too young. Because I thought keeping you in the dark was the same as keeping you safe. Rosie looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen but steady. Tell me, Mom, I am old enough now. Nora took a breath. It shuddered going in. When I was 21, she began. I was a nursing student in Las Vegas. I lived in a tiny motel room because it was all I could afford. I was working and studying and trying to build a life. And one night a man nearly died on my doorstep. She paused. Garrett stood nearby, listening, his arms at his sides, offering nothing but presence. I saved him. You know that part now. But what you do not know is what happened after. When the men who attacked Decker found out someone had hidden him, they came looking. Not that night, not that week, but months later. They asked around, showed my description. I started getting phone calls with nobody on the other end. Started seeing the same car parked outside my motel. Found a note on my windshield that said 2 words. We know. Rosie's grip tightened. Nora continued. So I ran. I left Las Vegas in the middle of the night with 1 bag and $40. I drove east, then north, then west. I changed my name on my apartment applications. I found work under a different spelling of my last name. I ended up in Flagstaff because it was small and quiet and far enough from Vegas that I thought nobody would look for me here. She stroked Rosie's hair, the gesture automatic, comforting herself as much as her daughter. That is why I work 2 jobs, Rosie. Not just because we need the money, though we do, but because I never wanted to depend on anyone. Depending on people means trusting people, and trusting people means letting them close enough to know who you are. And for 12 years, I believed that if anyone knew who I really was, the danger would follow. She looked at the bikers around them, at Garrett, at Flint, at the men who had just torn through the Arizona desert to save her child. I was wrong, she said. I spent 12 years alone, and the danger came anyway. And the only reason my daughter is alive right now is because I was not alone tonight. Garrett let the words settle. Then he spoke, and his voice was the gentlest Nora had heard from any man in 12 years of deliberate isolation. You do not have to run anymore, Nora. Nora stared at him. 12 years. 12 years of running, of looking over her shoulder in parking lots, of checking the locks on her doors 3 times before bed, of keeping her head down and her voice quiet and her life small enough to fit inside a shadow. And now a man she had never met before tonight was telling her it was over, and she believed him, because the way he said it carried the weight of a man who had spent his life keeping promises. She looked down at Rosie. The girl's face was pressed against her scrubs, her breathing finally evening out, her grip loosening from desperate to merely tight. Nora kissed the top of her daughter's head and tasted dust and tears in the soap from her morning bath. And she understood that the life she had built on fear was finished. Whatever came next would be built on something else. In the distance, sirens began their approach, red and blue lights pulsing against the desert sky like stars that had fallen to earth and were trying to find their way home. Flint stood over the wiry man, who had stopped struggling, and lay on the ground staring at the sky with the blank expression of a man whose plan had been thoroughly, completely, irrevocably ended. The long-haired biker walked the perimeter, checking the dark sedan, securing the scene with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this before, though in circumstances he preferred not to discuss. The thick-necked biker stood at the edge of the road, hands on his hips, watching the approaching lights with an expression that mixed relief with the permanent wariness of someone who had never fully trusted law enforcement and was not about to start tonight. Garrett stood apart from the others, watching Nora and Rosie. He did not interrupt them. He did not approach. He simply stood a tall, dark figure against the headlight, glare his shadow stretching long across the red dirt. And he watched a mother hold her daughter the way he imagined all mothers would hold their children if they understood how quickly the world could take them. Rosie lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. She looked at Garrett, then at Flint. Then at the bikers around them, these men in leather and ink and chrome, who had appeared in her life 3 hours ago as strangers and were now standing in the desert dark like sentinels, like guardians from one of the stories her mother used to tell her, at bedtime stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the night got dark enough. She said quiet but certain, "They came for us, Mom." Nora stroked her daughter's hair. "Yes, love, they came for us." And in the silence that followed, broken only by approaching sirens and the distant howl of a coyote and the slow tick of a cooling engine, Rosie Beckett understood something that most people spend their entire lives trying to learn. That kindness is not a single act. It is a chain. Each link forged by someone brave enough to help when helping is the last thing the world expects. Her mother had forged the first link in a motel room in Las Vegas. And tonight, 12 years later, the chain had circled back and caught them both before they fell. The police arrived in 2 cruisers, their lights painting the desert in alternating red and blue, turning the scrubland into something that looked like the floor of a dance hall at the end of a long night. Officers stepped out with hands on holsters and flashlights, sweeping ready for what dispatch had described as an armed confrontation on the shoulder of Highway 89A. What they found was something their training had not prepared them for. 6 Harley-Davidsons parked in a loose semicircle, a dark sedan tilted in a drainage ditch, a wiry man lying face up on the dirt with a biker's boot planted firmly on his sternum and an expression suggesting he had made several regrettable life decisions in rapid succession. And in the center of it all, a woman in hospital scrubs holding a 9-year-old girl, as though the earth might open and swallow them both if she let go. The first officer, a young man with a crew cut and the cautious posture of someone who had graduated the academy recently enough to still remember every page of the manual, approached Garrett. "Sir, can you tell me what happened here?" Garrett looked at him. The look was not hostile, but it carried the density of a man who had been asked questions by law enforcement more times than he had been asked questions by anyone else, and who understood that the next few minutes required a very specific kind of cooperation. He gave the account, clean, factual, stripped of anything that might complicate the straightforward narrative of a woman threatened by an armed man, a child abducted, a pursuit, a recovery. He mentioned Wade Loomis by name. He mentioned the iron bar which lay where it had been dropped, gleaming dully in the headlight wash. He mentioned the sabotaged oil line. He mentioned the second man, the wiry one currently enjoying Flint's boot on his rib cage. The officer took notes. His partner checked on Nora and Rosie kneeling beside them with the careful gentleness of someone who understood that the child in the woman's arms had been through something that no child should experience. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" Nora shook her head. Her voice was steady now, the kind of steady that comes after the worst has happened and there is nothing left to fear. "No, we are both okay. My daughter is not injured." The officer looked at Rosie. "And you, sweetheart? Are you hurt anywhere?" Rosie lifted her face from her mother's shoulder. Her eyes were puffy and her cheeks were streaked, but her voice was clear. "No, sir. I am okay. I turned on the hazard lights so they could find me." The officer blinked, looked at Nora. Nora nodded a small, fierce nod that said, "Yes, my daughter did that, and I will spend the rest of my life being proud of it." Meanwhile, the second cruiser had driven back up Highway 89A to the original confrontation site, where Dutch stood over Wade Loomis with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be and nothing more important to do. Wade was seated on the asphalt wrist, zip-tied behind him, with a pair Dutch had borrowed from the sedan's glove box, because even criminals, it turned out, carried cable ties. Wade had not spoken since Dutch had told him, in a voice like gravel being poured into a grave, that silence was his best remaining option. The officers loaded Wade into one cruiser. The wiry man went into the other. Statements were taken, badge numbers exchanged. A tow truck was called for Nora's blue sedan, still sitting on the roadside with its hood up and its oil line bleeding into the Arizona dirt. One of the officers, the older one, a man with a thick mustache and the slow, careful manner of someone who had been doing this job long enough to know when a scene was more complicated than it appeared, approached Garrett as the cruisers prepared to leave. "These men threatened Miss Beckett." Garrett nodded. "The one in the first car, Wade Loomis, is the organizer. He admitted to sabotaging her vehicle and waiting for her to become stranded. The second man abducted her daughter from the scene. We pursued and recovered the child." The officer studied Garrett for a long moment. He took in the leather, the patches, the tattoos, the Harley, the entire visual vocabulary that usually prompted a very different kind of conversation between law enforcement and the men who wore it. "And you are friends of the family," Garrett said. The words were simple. The officer understood they contained a great deal more than their surface meaning. The officer nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "good thing her friends were in the area tonight." He tipped his hat, returned to his cruiser, and the red and blue lights swung around and headed back toward Flagstaff, carrying Wade Loomis and his accomplice toward a future that involved concrete walls and fluorescent lighting, and a significant amount of time to reflect on the consequences of patience applied to the wrong purpose. Through all of it, Garrett stood apart. He leaned against his Harley with his arms crossed, watching the process unfold with the expression of a man who had been on enough roadsides in enough situations to know that the law would do what the law does, and his part was finished. Almost finished. When the cruisers pulled away, Garrett pushed himself off his Harley and walked to Nora. The other bikers gathered. Flint, the thick-necked one, the long-haired one. They formed a loose half circle, not surrounding Nora and Rosa, but standing with them the way a family stands together after a storm has passed and the damage is being assessed. Garrett reached into the inner pocket of his leather jacket. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, as though what it sought was fragile or sacred, or both. He withdrew an old patch scarf. Red fabric faded by years and sun, and the particular erosion that comes from being carried close to a man's chest for over a decade. The edges were frayed, the threads loose and reaching. Embroidered in the center in thick, uneven stitches that spoke of handwork rather than machine precision, was a skull with wings spread wide. Flint saw it and went still. "Boss, you have kept that scarf for over 10 years. The thick-necked biker exhaled through his nose. "That is Decker's scarf." Garrett nodded. His eyes were on Nora, and in them was something that the bikers had seen only a handful of times in the decades they had ridden with this man. Vulnerability, not weakness, not softness, but the unguarded expression of a man who was about to do something that mattered to him in a way that his leather and his reputation and his 60 years of practiced distance could not protect him from. "Decker left this with me after he survived," Garrett said. His voice was low, careful, as though he was handling the words the way you handle old glass. He said, "Keep it to remember. A kind person saved our brother." Nora stared at the scarf. Her hand rose to her mouth. The gesture was involuntary, the body's way of catching a sound before it escapes, and the sound it caught was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Garrett stepped forward. He placed the scarf in Nora's hand with a gentleness that contradicted every line on his face, every scar, every mile of hard road that had made him what he was. "Now it is my turn to give it to who deserves it." Rosie watched her mother's face as Garrett placed the scarf in her hands. She had seen her mother receive things before. Paychecks, bills, the occasional note from Rosie's teacher. But she had never seen her mother receive something the way she received this scarf, with her whole body, with her hands trembling, and her shoulders dropping, and her breath catching, and her eyes filling with a kind of light that Rosie had never seen in them before. Nora's fingers closed around the fabric. She felt the rough embroidery under her thumb, the old thread, the faded red, and she felt something else, something that had no texture but was more real than the scarf itself. She felt the weight of 12 years of gratitude that 6 men had carried across thousands of miles of American highway without ever knowing if they would find the person it belonged to. I did not do anything big, Nora said. Her voice cracked, reassembled, cracked again. I just did what a decent person should. Garrett shook his head. The motion was slow and carried the authority of a man who had thought about this for a very long time. In our world, Nora, decency is often the most dangerous thing. And you did it anyway. Rosie looked at the scarf in her mother's hand. She reached out and touched the embroidered skull with one finger, tracing the wings the way she had traced her mother's tattoo on those quiet nights in bed. The thread was rough and warm, and it felt like it was vibrating with something, with history, with the memory of a man who survived because a stranger opened a door. The thick-necked biker stepped forward. He had been quiet for most of the night, a man of action more than words, but now he spoke and his voice surprised everyone with its softness. Let us check the car. Nora blinked. My car. The long-haired biker was already walking toward the tow truck driver who had just arrived and was setting up to haul Nora's blue sedan. He waved the driver off. Give us 20 minutes. In moments, the bikers had the hood open and were bent over the engine with the focused efficiency of men who had spent their lives maintaining machines. Hands reached for tools that appeared from saddlebags and jacket pockets. Flashlights illuminated the engine bay. Voices murmured in the technical language of mechanics, a language as precise and specialized as any medical terminology Nora had learned in nursing school. The oil line was the primary issue, cut clean deliberately by someone who knew exactly how to disable a vehicle without making the damage obvious until the engine ran dry. The long-haired biker found a replacement hose in his saddlebag. It was not a perfect fit, but it was close enough, and with the application of 2 clamps and a vocabulary of profanity that he carefully modified in deference to Rosie's presence, the line was repaired. Oil was added from a bottle the thick-necked biker kept strapped to his Harley's frame. The engine was tested, it turned over, coughed once, and then settled into a steady hum that sounded healthier than it had in months. Not badly broken, the long-haired biker said, wiping his hands on a rag that was already so stained with engine fluids that the original color was a matter of archaeological speculation. She will get you home. Get a proper line replaced at a shop this week. Flint checked the tires while the thick-necked biker tested the battery connections. The long-haired one examined the brakes because when a man like Wade Loomis sabotages an oil line, you check everything else too. Each biker moved with the practiced ease of men who had rebuilt engines on the side of highways and motel parking lots, in the dirt shoulders of roads that did not appear on any map. They knew machines the way Nora knew human bodies intimately, intuitively, with the hands-on knowledge that comes from years of keeping things alive that the world was trying to let die. Rosie watched them. She sat on the ground, cross-legged, the patched scarf draped over her mother's lap, and she watched these men with the pure, uncritical attention of a child who has decided that the people in front of her are good and has no interest in evidence to the contrary. Mom, she whispered, they are like angels in leather. Nora laughed. The laugh surprised her. It came from a place she had not visited in a long time, a place where things were funny and the world was and the future held something other than work and worry. Yeah, she said, her voice shaky but soft. Sometimes angels do not have white wings, love. Nora watched them work. She watched these men, these Hell's Angels, these figures that society painted with a single broad brush of fear and suspicion, bend over her old car in the desert dark and fix it with the same care a surgeon would give an operating table. And she understood something that she would carry with her for the rest of her life, that the world's categories are lies, that the boxes people are sorted into good and bad, safe and dangerous, hero and villain, are constructed by people who have never stood on a dark roadside and watched the supposed villains save their daughter's life. While the bikers worked, Rosie sat on the ground beside her mother, wrapped in Nora's torn jacket, watching with the wide-eyed fascination of a child at a magic show. When the engine started, she clapped her hands, and the sound was so pure and so unexpected that the thick-necked biker laughed a real laugh, deep and honest. The kind of laugh that a man carries inside him for years without using because the world has not given him sufficient reason. Garrett returned to his Harley. He signaled his crew with a look that needed no translation. "We take them home." Flint grinned at Rosie. The grin transformed his face from wary and hard to something approaching boyish. And Rosie realized that under the leather and the tattoos and the knife at his belt, Flint was not much older than some of the counselors at her summer camp. And he smiled the same way they did when something good happened. "Special escort," Flint said. "Hop in the car with your mom. We ride around you." The formation assembled with the speed and precision of something rehearsed 1,000 times, though this particular formation, this particular purpose, was unprecedented. Two bikes ahead of Nora's sedan, two flanking on either side. Garrett at the rear, his position the same as it had been all night. The watchful last eye, the final line between the people he was protecting and whatever the world might send. They rode toward Flagstaff. The desert night opened before them like a dark corridor, and the combined headlights of 6 Harleys and one old blue sedan filled it with enough light to see by enough light to trust. Inside the car, Rosie pressed her face to the window and watched the bikers ride. "Mom," she said, "it is like being escorted by superheroes." Nora smiled. The smile held layers like sediment in rock. Relief at the bottom, gratitude in the middle. And on top, something that looked very much like hope, a thing she had not allowed herself to feel in 12 years. Sometimes heroes wear leather and ride Harleys, love. The convoy entered Flagstaff's residential streets just past 11 o'clock. The neighborhood was quiet in the way that small-town neighborhoods are quiet on weeknights. A few porch lights left on for cats or teenagers, a distant television flickering in someone's den, the occasional sprinkler hissing against the lawn that the desert wanted back. The sound of 6 Harley-Davidsons entering that quiet was not subtle. It was in fact the opposite of subtle. It was a sound that traveled through closed windows and locked doors and sleeping bodies and dreams, and it brought people upright in their beds and then to their front porches and then to the edge of their yards where they stood in robes and pajamas and old t-shirts and stared. What they saw was this: 6 gleaming black motorcycles in perfect formation, riding slowly, deliberately, like a funeral procession or a royal escort. And in the center of that formation, visible through the gaps between the bikes, Nora Beckett's old blue sedan, the one every neighbor recognized because it had been parked in the same driveway for 8 years and leaked oil on the same spot of concrete for 7 of them. A woman in her yard, still holding the watering can she had been using on her evening tomatoes, dropped it. Water pooled around her feet, and she did not notice. "That is Nora," she said. Nora Beckett. What on earth? An elderly man 3 houses down stood on his porch with his hands in his cardigan pockets, watching the convoy pass with the expression of someone witnessing something historical and knowing it. He said nothing. He did not need to. The formation reached Nora's house, a small single story with white siding that needed painting, and a front yard that Rosie had decorated with painted rocks arranged in a pattern that only made sense to a 9-year-old and was therefore perfect. A chain-link fence that Nora had mended 3 times. A mailbox with a crooked post that leaned slightly east, as though it too was tired of standing straight. This was not a house that expected 6 Harley-Davidsons to park in front of it. This was a house that expected electric bills and grocery bags and the sound of a 9-year-old girl practicing multiplication tables at the kitchen table. The bikers pulled to a stop, engines idled. Then on some unseen signal from Garrett, 6 headlights blazed to full beam, flooding the yard and the house in the street with brilliant white light, turning the ordinary residential scene into something that looked like a stage set for the final act of something grand. Nora stopped the car. She and Rosie stepped out into the light. Rosie's hand found her mother's. The scarf was in Nora's other hand, and she held it against her chest the way you hold something that has traveled a long distance to find you. A neighbor whispered from across the street, "They really escorted her home." Another whispered back, "Who are those men?" Then Garrett killed his engine. The sudden silence was as dramatic as the noise had been. He removed his helmet. His salt and pepper hair flattened by the helmet caught the headlight glow. He walked toward Rosie and Nora, his boots on the concrete driveway, making no hurry, because this moment did not belong to hurry. It belonged to something older and more important. But before he reached them, a sound came from the end of the street. A single engine. Not the deep thunder of a Harley in formation, but the solitary rumble of a bike approaching, lone its headlight, a single white point growing brighter as it turned the corner. The bikers turned. Flint's hand moved to his belt by reflex. The thick-necked biker shifted his weight. But Garrett raised one hand palm out and they stilled because Garrett had been expecting this. Garrett had made a phone call from the roadside while Nora was giving her statement to the police, a call so quiet that only Dutch had heard it and Dutch had said nothing because some calls are private even among brothers. The lone Harley pulled to a stop in front of Nora's house. The rider was tall, but not as tall as Garrett. Broad but leaner, built like a man who had been broken once and had rebuilt himself with care. He wore a leather jacket with fewer patches than the others, and when he removed his helmet, his face was weathered but open with deep brown eyes that held the particular intensity of a man who knows exactly what he owes and has been waiting a very long time to repay it. He looked at Nora. Nora looked at him. And the 12 years between them collapsed like a bridge that had been waiting for someone to cross it. His name was Decker, the man Nora Beckett had pulled from her motel doorstep in Las Vegas. The man she had hidden under her bed. The man she had fed and bandaged and kept alive for 3 days while killers searched room by room. The man who had given her a tattoo with a chip on the right wing because the artist sneezed. He was 45 years old now. He lived in Reno. He worked at an auto repair shop he had opened with money he saved over 7 years. He had been sober for 6 of those years. He had a small house with a workshop out back where he made things with his hands. When the nights got long and the memories got loud, and on one of those nights, 6 weeks ago, Garrett Slade had called him and told him where Nora Beckett was living, and Decker had set his tools down and wept for the first time since the night he had knocked on a motel door in Las Vegas, and a young woman with kind eyes had opened it. He stood beside his bike for a long moment, not moving, not speaking, just looking at the woman who had saved his life with hot water and old towels and more courage than he had encountered in 45 years of living. Then he walked forward. Each step was deliberate, weighted as though the ground between them was sacred and deserved to be crossed with respect. He stopped in front of Nora. His eyes were wet. His jaw was tight. His hands large and scarred and capable hung at his sides, trembling slightly. "Nora," he said. His voice broke on the second syllable. "Decker." She said his name, and it carried everything. The memory of blood on her motel floor. The memory of his weight as she dragged him inside. The memory of standing at a door looking into the eyes of men who wanted to kill and saying 2 words that saved a life. The memory of 3 days in a room the size of a closet keeping a stranger alive because it was the right thing to do, and she did not know how to do anything else. Decker dropped to one knee, not in proposal, in gratitude. The gesture was old-fashioned and earnest and stripped of any pretense, and it hit every person watching, bikers and neighbors and the 9-year-old girl standing beside her mother, with the force of something irreducibly true. "I owe you my life," Decker said. "I have owed it for 12 years. Every morning I wake up, every breath I take, every mile I ride, I owe to you. And I am sorry it took this long to say it to your face." Nora reached down and placed her hand on his shoulder. The gesture was automatic, the gesture of a nurse, the gesture of a woman who had spent her life touching people who were hurting and helping them stand. "You do not owe me anything," she said. "You survived. That is enough." Decker shook his head. He stood, and when he was upright, he turned to look at Rosie. Rosie looked back at him. She had heard his name in Garrett's story, had called him Uncle Decker. In the diner, had imagined his face in the dark of a motel room, beaten and bleeding, reaching for a door that a brave young woman opened. And now he was here. Real. Standing in her driveway with wet eyes and a leather jacket and the particular stillness of a man who has found something he lost a long time ago. "You must be Rosie," Decker said. His voice was steadier now. Warmed by the sight of the child, he crouched to her level. Rosie nodded. "You are Uncle Decker. My mom saved you." Decker smiled. The smile rewrote his face entirely. "Yes, she did. And looking at you, I can see she has spent the years since then doing something even braver." "What is that?" Rosie asked. "Raising you." The word landed on Rosie like sunlight through a window. She did not fully understand what it meant. Not yet, not in the way she would understand it years from now, when she was old enough to measure the weight of what her mother had done and continued to do every single day. But she understood enough. She understood that this man thought her mother was brave. She understood that this man was alive because of her mother. And she understood that her mother had never once, not once, mentioned any of it because Nora Beckett did not do brave things for the credit. She did them because they needed to be done. Rosie's lip trembled. She reached forward and hugged him, and Decker closed his eyes and held this child he had never met, this small, fierce girl who existed because her mother had survived, who was brave because her mother was brave, who had turned on hazard lights in the back of a kidnapper's car because she had learned from a woman who did not know the meaning of giving up. Decker pulled back. He reached into his jacket and brought out something small, something that glinted in the headlight wash. A miniature helmet, tiny red and black with small white wings painted on each side. The kind of thing you might find in a biker's collection, except this one had been made by hand. Decker had made it himself in a workshop behind his house in Reno, in the months after Garrett's phone call had told him where Nora was. He had made it because he did not know what else to give to the daughter of the woman who saved his life. "This is for you," Decker said. He placed it in Rosie's palm. Rosie stared at it. The tiny wings caught the light and threw it back in small bright shards. The detail was perfect. The care was visible in every line, every stroke of paint, every small imperfection that proved it had been made by human hands for a specific human purpose. "So you remember Decker said that someone is always watching and protecting you." Rosie clutched the helmet to her chest. She looked at Decker, then at Garrett, then at Flint, then at each biker in turn. 6 men, and now 7. Standing in her driveway on a weeknight in Flagstaff, Arizona, bathed in motorcycle headlights, having just crossed the desert to protect a woman who once crossed a motel room to protect one of them. Nora was crying. She had given up trying not to. The tears ran freely, and she did not wipe them, because these were not the tears of pain or fear that she had cried too many times in the last 12 years. These were different. These were the tears that come when something broken is finally being mended, and you can feel the pieces clicking back into place, and the sound they make is not mechanical, but musical. Garrett stepped forward. He stood before Rosie, the last man to speak, the first man she had met that evening in the diner when she had looked at his tattoo and changed the course of the night. "Rosie," he said, "listen close." Rosie looked up at him. The headlights behind Garrett made him a silhouette, broad and tall and dark, but his eyes caught the light and held it, and they were not cold anymore. Had not been cold for hours, were in fact the warmest eyes Rosie had ever seen on a face that hard. "From now on," Garrett said, "if anyone at all messes with you," he paused, ensuring every word landed where it was meant to land, "you just say Mom once saved the angels. That is enough." The words hung in the night air. A neighbor 3 houses down covered her mouth. The elderly man on his porch removed his cardigan and pressed it to his chest. Nora closed her eyes. Rosie stood absolutely still for 3 heartbeats. Then she threw her arms around Garrett Slade and held on with everything her 9-year-old body had. Garrett stiffened. His arms hung at his sides for a moment, the arms of a man who had not been hugged by a child in decades and had forgotten the protocol. Then slowly, carefully, as though holding something made of glass and sunlight, he placed his hands on her back and held her. Flint looked away, not because the scene was uncomfortable, but because something was happening to his eyes that he would deny under oath. The thick-necked biker cleared his throat 3 times in rapid succession. The long-haired one became very interested in the condition of his motorcycle's left mirror. Decker watched with the expression of a man whose entire life had just been justified by a single image, a little girl hugging a Hells Angels leader in a driveway in Flagstaff, while the whole neighborhood watched. Garrett released Rosie, gently, the way you set down something precious. He straightened, donned his helmet, and turned to his crew. "Let us go." The words were simple. The response was not. It was 6 men and Decker simultaneously becoming something else, something larger than individuals, becoming a formation, a unit, a pack. Decker nodded to Nora one last time, a nod that said everything a nod can say, and then he donned his helmet and walked to his bike with the measured steps of a man who has just set down a weight he has carried for 12 years and is still adjusting to how light the world feels without it. Engines fired in sequence, each one adding its voice to a chorus that shook the windows of every house on the street. 7 Harleys now where 6 had begun the night. The addition felt right, felt complete, as though the formation had always had a gap in it that nobody noticed until it was filled. Headlights swept the road as bikes turned in perfect synchronization. Nora stood on the lawn, Rosie at her side, the old patch scarf in her left hand and her right hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. She watched the bikers prepare to leave, and she felt for the first time in 12 years that the space around her was not empty. That the silence she had kept for so long had been filled not with noise but with presence, with the knowledge that somewhere on the road someone remembered what she had done and considered it worthy of riding through the night. "Thank you," she said. The words were inadequate. She knew they were inadequate, but she said them anyway because they were all she had. Garrett, already on his bike helmet on engine idling, turned his head toward her. He nodded once. The nod carried everything the words could not. Then the formation moved. 7 Harleys rolling down the quiet residential street, past the neighbors in their robes, past the watering cans, and the porch lights and the sprinklers, past the ordinary markers of ordinary lives that had just witnessed something extraordinary. The engines faded gradually the way thunder fades after a storm, leaving behind a silence that felt different from the silence before. Fuller, warmer, alive. Garrett glanced back once. Just once. Through his mirror, he could see Nora and Rosie on the lawn, 2 figures in the headlight, afterglow holding each other and the gifts they had been given. He looked for 1 second. Then he faced forward, and the Hells Angels biker pack disappeared into Flagstaff's night, leaving nothing behind but the fading rumble of engines and the memory of a debt repaid. The neighborhood was quiet again, but it was a different quiet, a quiet that held a story in it. A story that the woman with the watering can would tell her sister over coffee the next morning, that the elderly man on the porch would recount to his grandson over the phone, that every person who had watched from their windows and yards would carry into their week and their month and their year and retell until it became legend. The night the Hells Angels came to Flagstaff, not to cause trouble, but to protect a kind woman and her daughter. Nora and Rosie stood on the lawn for a long time after the last engine sound vanished. The desert wind blew gently, carrying the scent of sage and cooling asphalt, and the faintest trace of motor oil, as though the road itself was saying goodnight. Mom, Rosie said. Her voice was small and tired and full. "Yes, love. Can we go inside?" They went inside. Nora turned on the living room light. Warm yellow glow covered the small room. The second-hand sofa, the bookshelf with Rosie's drawings taped to the side, the kitchen table where they ate breakfast at 5 in the morning, because Nora's shift started at 6. Everything was the same as it had been when they left that afternoon. Everything was completely different. Nora locked the front door. Then she checked the lock. Then she stopped, her hand still on the deadbolt, and she realized that for the first time in 12 years, she was not checking the lock out of fear. She was checking it out of habit, and the fear that had lived behind the habit, the fear that had been her constant companion since a night in Las Vegas when she made the bravest decision of her life and spent every day since paying for it, was gone. Not diminished, not managed, gone. Like a guest who has finally mercifully left the house. She turned from the door and found Rosie already on the sofa, the miniature helmet in her lap, looking at her mother with eyes that were tired and bright, and ancient in the way that children's eyes become ancient when they have seen something that most adults never see. Rosie sat beside her mother on the sofa. She took Nora's left hand and turned it over, exposing the inside of the wrist. The tattoo, the skull with wings. Small and faded, the ink softened by years and sun and work and life, but still there, still readable, still carrying its promise. Mom, Rosie whispered, "I am not scared of this tattoo anymore." Nora looked at her daughter. "Really?" Rosie nodded. Her eyes were bright in the lamplight. "Yes, I feel proud, because it is the tattoo that good people gave you. It means you are a hero. It means someone somewhere is always going to protect us." Nora could not answer. The words were too big for her throat. She pulled Rosie close and pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head and breathed in the smell of dust and shampoo and childhood and courage. And she understood that everything she had hidden, everything she had feared, everything she had sacrificed had led to this moment. This small room, this warm light, this child who knew the truth and was not afraid. Rosie slid off the sofa and ran to her room. She came back with a pink diary, the one with the cat on the cover that Nora had given her for her birthday. She opened it to a fresh page and wrote in her careful, slightly crooked handwriting, "My mom once saved the Iron Angels." Nora read the words over her daughter's shoulder and covered her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shook, not with grief, but with the overwhelming, unbearable, beautiful weight of being known, of being seen by the one person whose opinion she valued above all others. Rosie grabbed her crayons and sat on the floor. She began to draw. Nora wiped her eyes and leaned in to watch. On the paper under the warm light, a figure emerged. A large man in a leather jacket, gray beard, stern-faced, kind eyes. Beside him, a massive Harley-Davidson, every detail approximate but recognizable. And above his head, drawn with the careful conviction of a child who believes completely in what she is creating, small wings of light. "This is Mr. Garrett," Rosie said softly. "I think he is like a superhero." Nora laughed through her tears. "Yeah, Mom thinks so too." Rosie colored each line with concentration. When she finished, she held the drawing up. "Do you think Mr. Garrett would like this picture?" Nora stroked her hair. "If he saw it, he would be so proud." Outside, the desert wind blew gently. The porch light cast a small circle of warmth on the front step. Somewhere miles away on a highway, cutting through the dark, 7 Harley engines still rumbled toward whatever horizon waited. But in this house, in this room, on this floor, a mother and daughter sat together in the light and felt for the first time in a very long time that the world was exactly the right size. Rosie drew until her eyes grew heavy. She drew Flint with his curly hair and his grin. She drew Dutch with his silver beard and his deep eyes. She drew Decker kneeling in the driveway. She drew the formation of bikes surrounding her mother's car like bright steel wings. She drew the desert and the stars and the road and the night, and in every drawing she drew her mother in the center, because that was where Nora Beckett belonged, and Rosie had always known it, even before tonight confirmed it, in a language the whole world could understand. Near midnight, Rosie climbed into bed. She held the miniature helmet against her chest, feeling its small weight, its painted wings, its quiet promise. Nora pulled the blanket up and tucked it around her daughter's shoulders with the same careful attention she brought to everything, to bandaging wounds, to fixing engines, to standing at doors and telling lies that saved lives. She smoothed the hair from Rosie's forehead and looked at her daughter's face. This face she had memorized 1,000 times in 9 years of mothering, and she saw something new in it tonight. Something that had not been there this morning when she kissed Rosie goodbye and drove to work in the dark. Strength. Not the strength of muscles or volume or size. The quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and where you come from and what the people who love you are capable of when the world turns dark. Mom, Rosie called softly. "Yes, I think from now on I will not be scared of the dark anymore." Nora cupped her daughter's cheek. Her hand was warm and steady. "Why, love? Because I know somewhere out there someone is always protecting me." Nora smiled. The smile held 12 years of fear and 12 years of hope, in the beginning of something that felt like freedom. She kissed Rosie's forehead, a long, slow kiss that tried to communicate everything words could not. She turned off the bedside lamp. The room went dark, but not the heavy dark of the desert highway. The gentle dark of a bedroom where a child is safe and knows it. Moonlight slipped through the gap in the curtains and laid a pale silver stripe across the wall, soft and steady as a nightlight left on by a guardian who never sleeps. Rosie lay still. She listened to the sounds of the house, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the wind pressing gently against the window, her mother's footsteps in the hall, then the quiet click of the living room lamp being turned off, then the soft creak of the sofa as Nora sat down, probably to hold the patch scarf and think about things that mothers think about when their children are safe in bed and the night has finally finished being dangerous. And then from very far away, from the edge of hearing, from the place where the desert meets the highway and the highway meets the horizon, came a sound. Low, deep, rhythmic. The rumble of Harley engines, distant and fading, carried on the wind like the last note of a song that has been playing all night and is finally gently ending. Rosie smiled. She closed her eyes. She pressed the miniature helmet to her heart. "Good night, Iron Angels," she whispered. And she slept. Deeply, completely, the way a child sleeps when the world has shown her its worst and its best in the same night, and the best has won. The moonlight held its place on the wall. The wind held the house gently. And somewhere on the road, growing fainter with each passing second, the engines carried their riders toward the next horizon and the next, loyal and free and grateful, because that is what angels do when their debt has been repaid. They ride on. And in a small house in Flagstaff, Arizona, a 9-year-old girl dreamed of motorcycles and wings and the sound of engines that meant safety. And her mother sat in the living room holding an old red scarf, and for the first time in 12 years, she did not check the locks again. She did not need to. The night had given her something stronger than locks. It had given her the knowledge that kindness once offered, does not disappear. It travels, it waits, it returns. And when it comes back, it brings with it a convoy of angels in leather riding through the dark, carrying a promise that the world keeps whether you believe in it or not. That goodness is never wasted. That courage is never forgotten. That somewhere on some road in some night, the people you helped will come back for you. They always do.